my name is Gina, and I've kind of been obsessed with rainbows for my entire life. Today, we're doing part 3 of my super hyper mega ultra giant large XXL eyeshadow palettes. If you are new in this series, here's a brief rundown. I have depotted every single eyeshadow that I have ever owned. I have repanned every single eyeshadow that I have ever owned that didn't already come in a 26mm pan. I then put them in large eyeshadow palettes, which I tend to lay out in front of me whenever I work. If you want to see part 1 on the series, which is about depotting, or part 2 of the series, which is about repanning, I will leave those linked maybe in the cards if I can figure out how to do that, but if not, then definitely down below. Today, what we're gonna do is we're actually going to just take a quick tour of the palettes as they exist in August 2019. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about how I've got things arranged, how they're set up, how I organize everything and keep track of it, etc. I think that's all I have to say, at least in terms of intro. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so here we are. This is what my makeup station looks like. My mirror lights are on because it is very closely approaching night. I hope that I'm not blinding you. But this is what my station looks like when I set out my palettes to work from them for the day. I lay them out next to each other like this and typically sit in the middle and work from them as well. I don't know if you noticed, but I have a duochrome on the blue palette, and stepping from one side to the other is kind of neat, but I digress. As I said, I typically sit in the middle here. I really enjoy seeing these laid out next to each other and being able to see the full spectrum of the tools that I have to work with. As we come in a little bit closer, we will talk about each palette individually, but first I want to just give you a brief overview of how they're organized. So if you couldn't already tell, they are in spectrum order. My experience with makeup is through artistry, so it's really not helpful to me to sort them by brand or anything else like that. The first piece of information that I need is the color and finish. So that's how they're laid out. The palettes go from cool pinks to cool reds, warm reds, peaches and corals, oranges, true oranges, yellow oranges, true yellows, cool yellows, warm greens, cool greens, warm blues, cool blues, then cool purples or indigos, and down through true purples to the few neutrals that I have set off. We're going to talk about neutrals here in a second, but I will just say these aren't the only neutrals that I own. They are just the only neutrals that I can't categorize with anything else. So put a pin in that and we'll talk about that later. Coming back over here to the red palette, we're going to talk a little bit about how things are organized within each palette. Now, I'm sure you will notice that this probably looks a little bit different than you were expecting in terms of something being arranged in spectrum order. And that is because, first of all, when I arranged these palettes initially, I arranged them like this. When I organized these, I initially did them in landscape, which is why when I rotated it, it probably makes a bit more sense. The middle 2 rows are the core of the palette, and this is true for all of the palettes here. They are the shadows sorted by color family, and they are the most saturated color in that color family. So, for example, This over here is cool pinks, and these two are the most saturated cool pinks that I have. Then going down from that, they will get progressively desaturated and darker. Then up from that, they get progressively desaturated and lighter. There are some exceptions to this throughout the palettes, but in general, that's how they work. And this is why I don't have a separate neutrals palette anymore, because a lot of neutrals, most neutrals, actually belong in a color family, but they are just desaturated versions of that color. A great example here, this is ColourPop's Paper Tiger. This would be very much at home in a warm neutrals palette. Nobody would think anything of it, but it's in my row of yellows because fundamentally it's a yellow. Same with a lot of these peachy tones down here. They all have different undertones, but they are all desaturated. And it's really tempting to call them neutral, but I find it's most useful and most cohesive to sort them with their mass tone color family because I get more use out of them that way. If you are at all familiar with my channel or my Instagram, you know I primarily work with color. So sorting neutrals out separate from everything else makes me pass up on them. I typically do not look at them or use them as much as when they're in this order. As you can see, if I have 3 palettes rotated in landscape, I would not be able to fit them here, which is why they're in portrait. When I go to redo these palettes, which will be somewhat soon, I will take on this organizational scheme in portrait orientation, but what that looks like is going to be probably a little different. The blue and green palette is probably the best place to talk about the fact that there are gaps. In previous palette organizations that I've had, I have made it like a priority to not have gaps in rows or columns or anything to that measure. And I found that in order to do that, I ended up having to stick colors where they really didn't belong. And that, it bugged me, but more practically, the fact that the color didn't jive with the colors around it made it stick out more, so I was drawn more to it, so I used it disproportionately more than the colors around it. So for this iteration, this scheme, I just have gaps, and that doesn't bother me very much at all. And in particular with my blues and my greens, it lets me know that I can grow. One of the things that I have considered is pulling the rightmost columns out to have a palette of whites. Let me know if you would be interested in seeing that, because I would be very interested in doing that. The last palette here is my purples and these neutral tones here. My purples also house grays because the grays that I have are very much in the purple mass tone. This is a palette that I really want to grow in the next batch of shadows that I get, but as I'm sure you know, purples can be really difficult to formulate and very pricey, so I don't know how practical that is. I would say that this row here with the super warm purples is probably the last row of color, and the last 3 are neutrals. What I did here is just to give you a sense of the warm purples versus cool pinks. They are different. The reason why these are out here is somewhat complicated. Part of the reason why I have these 3 rows of neutrals is they don't fit in terms of space, as in like even if like this or this would very easily go in a column of reds in the red palette, there's not enough space in the red palette. But more directly, they don't really fit in any of the mass tones that I've got. I would very often find that I would put them with a pink and it would be too cool, put them with a purple and it would be too warm. And I would say more than anything, if there are true neutrals in my collection, if there are such a thing, it's at least some of these. There's one last thing that I don't think I've touched on yet in any of these videos, and that is how I keep track of what is what within all of the depotting and all of the repanning. And the answer is super simple. I have these stickers that go on the back of what that I label. This isn't a great example because by the time I actually got to label this, I didn't know where it came from. So let me find it better. Here we go. This one here. So the top is a JP for Juvia's Place. The bottom is Masquerade for the palette that it came from. And the middle one is the name of the shade. Later, if I have the time and interest from other people, I might make downloadable templates for people to use, and we can have much nicer labels for our shadows. Anyway, this is just a quick palette tour of what my setup looks like in August 2019. This is probably the last, major appearance that these palettes will have in this form. I have a giant palette of Sydney Grace shadows that are going to end up being implemented in here in a few months. I have Cleona shadows that are going to get implemented. I have a bunch of singles over here in this little palette. I have the Morphe 35M, which is right over there, and you can't see it. But there's going to be a huge influx of eyeshadow here very soon, and so this is probably the last time you'll see these in this form. But the nice thing about me doing content is that I will keep you updated on when and where and how things change going forward, and I think that's a lot of fun. So, to wrap up, if you liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up. And if you like me and my flowing red hair, please do also subscribe to the channel. I upload on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays for the foreseeable future. You can find me on the internet at Faces by Gina. I have an Instagram and a Facebook account where I upload every single day. I hope that you're having a great day, no matter where you are. Please do remember to think deeply, critically engage the world around you, and be good to yourself and other people. I'll see you out there on the internet. Bye.